What's up, Degenerate Nation? Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. I'm Stuckey, and with me, as always, is Collin Wilson. It's our inaugural episode on the new channel. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you found your way here. I'm very excited to have a college-only exclusive channel. How goes it, Collin?
Well, I mean, we have our own college exclusive channel. We're going to have more college basketball, more college football, more than what we're regular with on the other channel. And there may even be a little bit of college baseball audio to come up next spring. We'll have to see how that goes. But I can't think of a better way to kick off this new podcast channel than to talk about one of our favorite conferences, who's like literally going through breaking news right now. It's not, no surprise. It looks like KU is in the sights of the Big Ten. Either the Big Ten wants them or KU wants them. It looks like there's some chatter out there about that. But plus, we get to talk about some of our favorite coaches here. We love Ryan Day. We don't feel the same about some of the other coaches in this conference. So I'm happy to be here. We have started off with the right conference to get off to the right foot.
Yep. If you haven't already checked out our previous episodes, we've covered the Big 12, the ACC, and we had a high-level two-part overview of the college football landscape and some win total talk. That's on our previous feed. That's it. We won't be there ever again. So if you want to listen to us, you'll find us here. We have Pac-12 coming up next Tuesday, and then we'll get into some Group of Five. We'll have 2 episodes for the SEC, 1 for each division, and then it's, week 0 is going to be here. So it's coming up quick. But let's dive right into the Big Ten. Look, we just did the ACC. The story over the years has been Clemson dominating the conference. It's a similar story here with Ohio State. Ohio State's going for their 5th straight Big Ten title. Well, they got a little bit of help last year with the rule change, but they haven't lost to a team in their division in the East since Penn State in a whiteout at Happy Valley in 2016 is the last time that Ohio State lost a game to a team in their division. This year, they're clearly the favorites in the East. They did lose Justin Fields. They lost Trey Sermon and 7 regulars on defense, including their top 3 linebackers. So there are some questions, but this is Ohio State. They reload. Your 4 and 5 stars step in. We'll get to them in a second. The West has been very unpredictable over the years. A lot of times the preseason favorite doesn't go on to win it. Northwestern is actually going for their 3rd division title in the past 4 years. Coaching changes before we dive into the teams here. We have 1 new head coach, and we'll get to him in a second. And there's 4 teams that have both new offensive and defensive coordinators: Illinois, Maryland, Michigan, and Penn State. So, Maryland, Michigan, Penn State, same head coaches. James Franklin, after that start last year, maybe on the hot seat. We know Bodog Jim is. So trying to make some changes. 1 new head coach, and that head coach is the only head coach in FBS that has Collin Wilson blocked on Twitter. Brett Bielema takes over for Lovie Smith at Illinois in Champaign. So I need to know the story. Why are you blocked by Mr. Bielema?
Lovie Smith, more like Haiti Smith, right? So welcome to the new channel. If you're a longtime listener, Illinois is a program that we have struggled to handicap for a long time because there is just no consistency. And now Brett Bielema comes in. Yes, I'm blocked on Twitter by Brett Bielema. I believe the tweet was a hashtag 0-1 is what I said. Brett came to Arkansas after the John L. Smith and the program just fell into a trench. Bielema came in. He wanted to establish an identity. He ended everything with, we're going to go 1-0 today. At the same time, his wife, Jen Bielema, was tweeting at Wisconsin football saying hashtag karma. So Karma Jen and Brett didn't really work out at Arkansas. We ended up having an extremely huge, pricey facilities. Everything is brand new, brand spanking new facilities and everything, but we were winning maybe, a couple games a year, not really to justify the salary that he was being paid by athletic director John White, who's been fired by Arkansas and since been fired by Kansas. So Brett Bielema did not like my tweet saying that we went 0-1. I believe I was blocked around 2014.
Did you tag him or did he find it?
Might have been a mention. I think it might have been a mention. I think there might have been a mention back there saying we went 0-1 today, coach. But when you are a state as small as Arkansas, and the people that pay their taxes is what pays your salary, and the Razorback Foundation is what pays your salary, I expect more, especially when you shut off the recruiting to Texas and you say, I don't need Texas kids. I've been successful in Florida. I can go down to Florida and get as many recruits as I want. Whether I got to chase Alex Collins' mom and dad all around Florida to make him sign with us, I'm going to go, just focus on my recruiting on Florida. You wear a Razorback hat down to the state of Florida, nobody knows who that is. All right. So it's just, the whole entire thing was a misstep. It got worse and worse between the fan base, between Coach Brett Bielema. He's a little bit sensitive about his image. He's a little bit sensitive when he takes a loss. But I am looking for Wisconsin to thump them because there will be a hashtag karma to come out there. But no, Brett's back in college football. We are done. The Razorback Foundation is done paying him. He's not volunteering for Bill Belichick and the Patriots. He's not drawing a minimum wage salary for the New York Giants. And now that the Razorback Foundation has decided to stop paying Brett Bielema this ridiculous $20 million buyout, he had to get a job. And so now you can find him as the head coach of Illinois, probably waiting and biding his time so that Iowa job could come free to go back to where he played college football. But I couldn't be more than happy each week. I mean, what is this conference? The characters we got here between Bodog Jim, and if you're new to the podcast and everything, Jim Harbaugh doesn't like gamblers. He doesn't want to associate with them, doesn't want anything to do with them. So we call him Bodog Jim. And now we got Brett Bielema in the conference. And, I think it's just a cast of characters from PJ Fleck to, Pat Fitzgerald. It's just one of my most favorite conferences to talk about.
So I'm looking back at some old tweets that have both Collin and Brett Bielema in them. Here's one. Here's one. Try to pick out Dan Enos and Brett Bielema from this lineup. There's Beavis and Butthead, Dumb and Dumber, Bert and Ernie. Then there's another one, 2016. Brett Bielema halftime interview said second half focus was a real problem, and they would try to take care of that against the Bobs. Second half score 7-3 Hogs. So I'm trying to find the tweet. I'm going to find it, and then after this comes out, then I'm going to retweet it so you're listening to it, so I could try to find it from 2014. Because if you go back, there's a lot of Collin tweets about Brett Bielema. Oh, here it is. Entire Wilson family now blocked by Brett Bielema. So this is great. So I'm going to retweet something after this comes out on Thursday. So anyway, we'll get to Illinois. Let's Ohio State, by the way, is minus 200 to win the Big Ten. You got Penn State plus 800, Wisconsin plus 900, Iowa plus 1,400, and then the drop is pretty precipitous. In the West, it's pretty wide open. Wisconsin's your favorite, right around even money. Iowa plus 200, and those are the two teams that most people think are in the running. Minnesota, Northwestern, Nebraska, kind of that second tier, and then Purdue bringing up the rear. But let's start in the East, where Ohio State has just dominated this division. As we said, they're going for their fifth straight Big Ten title. We know they reload. This is year 4 of Ryan Day. Madison is gone as the co-defensive coordinator. I do have questions about the defense, specifically the secondary. Now, we said this on our main podcast. I don't think it really hurts them in the Big Ten, but if they were to get out of the Big Ten, which I think they do, get to the college football playoff, play an elite passing offense, I have questions about Kerry Coonstone. Takes over this defense full time. And, they lose all 3 starting linebackers. And on the offensive side, the talent is going to be there. The offensive line is excellent. You lose Trey Sermon, maybe the best. They still have one of the best, or maybe the best wide receiver groups in the country. But you lose Justin Fields as well. And not only do you lose Justin Fields, you don't have a quarterback on your roster who has thrown a pass in a game at the FBS level. But there's a ton of talent there. CJ Stroud probably the favorite to get the job. So there are questions with this Ohio State team, but they're clearly the cream of the crop and the rightful favorite to win the Big Ten again and get to the college football playoff. They have some interesting games on their schedule, Penn State and Oregon, but both of them are at home, and they will obviously look to continue their dominance of Michigan. Their away games, Minnesota, Rutgers, Indiana, Nebraska, and Michigan. Not bad at all. Just that, yeah, but I do have questions about, my main questions there is, all right, let me see this quarterback. I still think it's not going to matter in the Big Ten, but we got to see what the quarterback looks like. I want to see what Coombs does with this defense. They allowed 1.72 yards per play more last year than they did the year before. That was the fourth worst decline in all of college football. And then maybe I'll get a special team shout out early on here. Their kicking situation is a little questionable. I think their kicker went 0-2 in the spring game. But this team's obviously loaded. I'm nitpicking here. Anything with Ohio State over 11 minus 115 at BetMGM, the official odds provider of the Action Network podcast. I'm right there. So nothing here for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be shocked if they didn't make the college football playoff. I'd be absolutely stunned if they didn't make the college football playoff. And, I think when you're saying that you have questions about the defense, I think Ohio State themselves has questions about the defense. Finally, a scheme change over to a 4-2-5. They're introducing the new bullet position. No player has been assigned to that role. I mean, we're breaking camp here within the next week at all these colleges, and we get to get some more information about who's going to fill this role as the bullet position. And if you're wondering what a bullet position is, it's a floater that can line up defensively in the secondary, similar to Roquan Smith of Georgia, who played nickelback, Isaiah Simmons of Clemson, who was on the defensive line. He was back in the secondary. This is just a player that they need to create, mismatches, to give the quarterback looks, to make them confused, to catch up with Travis Etienne's in space. I mean, this is Ohio State trying to find an answer to them getting beat in the college football playoff or the national championship game. So they're going to run this 4-2-5. They have a schedule that's conducive for them to kind of try some things out until they figure out who that person in that position is going to be. But yeah, the talent is there, especially in the front seven. This true freshman, Jack Sawyer, we've been told is ready for the NFL. That's a statement and a half, especially with Chase Young being there before Heisman contention. Number 4 overall player in the 2021 recruiting class. He showed his explosive skills in the spring game. Speaking of that, if we flip over to the other side of the ball, I don't have any questions about CJ Stroud whatsoever. Justin Fields hit the spring game. Justin Fields transferred in from Georgia, and we all said, why doesn't Georgia love him? Why doesn't Kirby Smart love him? How could this kid be transferring? He has the same recruiting rank as Trevor Lawrence. And he went to the spring game and he was 4 of 13. His accuracy was a real issue in that spring game. CJ Stroud, not an issue. 16 of 25 in the spring game, 185 yards, mistake-free football. And that is going to put him alongside the best wide receiver unit in the nation with Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. And then as far as depth is concerned, we were betting Jeremy Ruckert props in the national championship. So, I mean, this is an offense we love. Ohio State has lost one game since 2018 that wasn't in the college football playoff. And it took a Rondell Moore Purdue effort to get that done. I don't have any questions about this team. They reload, even when they, you hear a big, thing like they only have 4 returning starters or they only return half their defense. It just doesn't matter. And when you look at the schedule and you compare it to Penn State's schedule, minus 200 is really, it's really not that bad. I mean, if you look at, I did a Pochon distribution piece where I looked at all of your win totals, what your projection is to have 1 loss in conference, 2 loss in conferences. Really, the numbers should be minus 630 for the division and more closer to about minus 150 for the conference. But I mean, a case can be made at minus 200. There are other numbers I would hit. We'll talk about those at the end of the podcast. But to me, Stuck, I'm excited to see Jack Sawyer. I don't see a bump in the road with CJ Stroud. The bullet position to me is the biggest thing, and not just for Ohio State. There are other teams going to a 4-2-5 and trying to identify this bullet position as they try to get ready for the Clemsons and the Alabamas of the world. Devontae Smith, this Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, just every defensive coordinator in the world has to find an answer, and not Isaiah Simmons and Roquan Smith just don't fall off, the back of the truck in the recruiting trail.
Yep. Yeah, they were outside the top 100 in pass success rate on defense last year. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Now, if your defensive front ends up being very elite and there's a lot of promise on the edges, that can cover up a lot of the holes that you have. And look, the talent is there at the quarterback position, but it's 0 career pass attempts for the first time in the Ohio State quarterback room since 1952. So is there, and you're going on the road in a conference game to start out your season. So, yeah, it's Minnesota. It's not a great defense, but that's a tough spot for a kid who's never thrown a pass. So we'll see right away. And then you get Oregon. So it's those first 2 games with a brand new quarterback. It's not like they're playing, Akron to start the season. So we'll see. But yeah, I do agree that they should win the division. And I think they ultimately win the Big Ten. But in that division in the East, I think the way that I would tier it, cream of the crop, Ohio State. And then I think your primary challengers would be Indiana and Penn State. And then the rest at this point, it's really shocking to say, are pretty, I would just bunch them all as like in that next tier. Like, I don't even think Rutgers is necessarily in the bottom anymore. They're right there with Michigan State, Maryland, Michigan. Now, you could be a little higher or lower on some of these teams, and some of the win totals dictate that. But I think that those teams are a step below Indiana and Penn State. Let's start with Penn State, who I think was a little unlucky last year. And they started shockingly 0-4 and then finished 5-0. But they were plus 102 yards per game last year, but they were negative 10 in turnovers. They're 117th in turnover margin, but they did win 4 straight. No, they started 0-5, excuse me. Started 0-5 and then won 4 straight to close the season. Clifford started to play a little bit better. I'm still not a believer in Sean Clifford. James Franklin maybe feeling some of the heat this year, brought in a new offensive coordinator, a new defensive coordinator. It's the 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 years. So while Clifford is back again after being benched last year, and then he won his job. He's got another offensive coordinator coming in here. There's talent here. The defensive line does have to be rebuilt. They lost a lot of talent on the defensive line, so that's something to watch. The one thing that really sticks out to me with Penn State and their win total at BetMGM over 8.5 minus 125 is their 3 toughest opponents on their schedule: Wisconsin, Ohio State, and Iowa. They get them all on the road, which is not an easy task. What do you see with the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, I think if new offensive coordinator Mike Yurcich can fix Sean Clifford, he should easily be up for the Broyles Award. So, Penn State, it's a projection that I make at 9.2. The over 8.5 is juiced to minus 125 at BetMGM. And there are things happening in the stat sheet and with the coaching staff that just give me a little bit of pause. James Franklin sweeping in to get Mike Yurcich because he was on the market, and firing Kirk Soraka after, getting him from Minnesota, kind of taking him out of Minnesota's mix in a COVID season where, Soraka was, dealt with Sean Clifford and, fixed this and started off 0-5. And, I think Franklin has always had, he knew that he wanted Mike Yurcich, and now that he's got him, and if you're not familiar with who that is, this is an offensive coordinator that made Oklahoma State what you remember it being, which is extremely explosive and extremely successful. Mike Yurcich moved on, I think had a stint at Ohio State. The guy is going to fix offenses. And I think the big thing about the Nittany Lions is there are things that happen, outside of the football field that you just, the loss of running back Noah Cain, the loss of Journey Brown, some losses on the offensive line itself, a sack rate of 87th, highlights an offensive line that had issues protecting Clifford and the backup Will Levis, who's left the program. Noah Cain does return to the backfield. That's a huge weapon. Along with some depth from the transfer portal, they got it on offense. They can get it back going, and Mike Yurcich is the offensive coordinator to do it. The defense, I got a little question about. I mean, Brent Pry, it seems like the defensive coordinator who's been with Franklin forever, since I think 2011 at Vanderbilt. It just seems like things are going in the wrong direction. Micah Parsons is now a Dallas Cowboy. Ellis Brooks and Jesse Luketa rise up from the depth chart as the top tacklers from last season. The issue with Brooks and Luketa is just the lack of havoc. There was no havoc out of the players that are returning to this defense. They recorded just 7 tackles for loss and 1 sack. That is not Penn State defense that I'm used to. The secondary returns 2 starters over the middle, but they got to improve at the corner position. The opponents just racked up explosive plays through the air. They had a coverage rank of 76th per PFF. It's one of the worst that Franklin's ever had. And Brent Pry, I'm not sure what's going on the defensive side of the ball. The schedule is brutal. Wisconsin and Iowa, while Ohio State draws, cross competition against Nebraska and Purdue. All hopes of, winning the East resides on a trip to Columbus, but you got to win the rest of your games. And it's just not doable. So, I project them at 9.1. There's coin flips, I said, against Iowa. Then there's a coin flip against Auburn. There's plenty of points on the schedule that are rising. Rutgers in year 2 of Greg Schiano will get there. Illinois is going to force a ground attack on you with Brett Bielema. So if Yurcich can correct the offensive line and Pry can get the havoc back on the defense, then yes, this is an over 8.5, but there's not a lot of room for error here with a schedule this tough. And the big question mark, of course, we'll go back to it. Sean Clifford at quarterback, got to get him fixed.
Yeah. Sorry, I mentioned that Penn State has a new defensive coordinator. They do not. I thought that he was going to be gone with Franklin making wholesale changes because of what that defense did last year. They allowed 27.7 points per game, most in school history. You mentioned the lack of playmaking, only 9 takeaways and 21 sacks for the whole year. Now it's a whole new defensive line, some reshuffling the linebacker position. So I do have questions about the defense. Look, it's a tough schedule too. Those 3 really tough road games, and you can't slip up anywhere else. You can't slip up against Indiana at home. You can't slip up against Michigan at home unless you steal one of those road games against Iowa, Wisconsin, or Ohio State. And then look, you got to go to Maryland, a much improved Maryland team who we'll get to. I ultimately think the number is spot on at over 8.5 minus 125. So nothing for Penn State for me. All right, and then let's move on to Indiana. Over 7.5 plus 115, 120. You can find some 8s out there as well. The big question here is, and look, you're hearing, is Indiana now a football school? It's like, all right, with timeout. we can relax a little bit. He's 24-22 over 5 years. Now, they're trending in the right direction. They were 6-2 last year. And the big question is going to be at Penix, their quarterback, Michael Penix, who's back from another injury. He's had 3 seasons that he's played, 3 season-ending injuries. And last year he tore the same ACL he tore back in 2018. So questions with Penix's health, because behind him, it's pretty pedestrian. He's 10-2 as a starter during his tenure in Bloomington. So there's a lot of hope if he can stay healthy, what this Indiana team can do, because their defense should be excellent. This is arguably a top 10 defense. You lose Johnson at the safety position, but you bring Ball back at that Husky position. And it's just a loaded group with a lot of experience. New defensive coordinator, but I don't think they'll change much on the defensive side. Offense, you do have to worry about replacing a center and one of your most reliable possession receivers. The running game has been just meh. Can you get that going? And it's just, they were 124th in rush explosiveness last year. Just no explosiveness from the rushing attack to help out Penix in that department. The question is with Indiana, it's a brutal schedule. Here's their away games are, and I'll tell you right up front, Indiana under is one of my favorite. If you can get 8 juice, one of my favorite win totals. I'm right at about 7, and the schedule is just brutal. Look, 7-5 for Indiana this year. You could finish in the top 25, and it could be a successful season just because the schedule is. And that's assuming Penix stays healthy, which isn't necessarily a given. But at Iowa, Cincy, at Penn State, they get Ohio State at home, but Ohio State's off of a bye. Those 4 games right there could easily lose all 4. Then you're talking at Michigan, at Maryland. No gimmies. Let's even throw in at Purdue, a rivalry game to close the year. How about Trap City at Western Kentucky? Western Kentucky off of a bye. Meanwhile, Indiana will be coming off the game against Cincy with Penn State the week after. That's not an easy trip. That is flat, trap, look-ahead city. So right there, those are, at Maryland, at Michigan, at Purdue, at Western Kentucky in a bad spot, at Penn State, at Iowa, Cincy, and Ohio State. That's 8 games that if you told me they lost any one of them, I would not be shocked. So I'm closer to 7. I'm going to go under 8, especially for a team that last year ran extremely well in the turnover department. I think there's some regression coming there. Also in the red zone on both sides of the ball. So I think that there's some regression coming for this group. The defense will be excellent. It'll keep them in most games. But I think that this is likely a 7-win team, and which would be a successful season given their schedule. What do you see with the Hoosiers?
Well, considering it's Indiana football, that would be very successful, but I think expectations have been elevated a little bit for a program that is very much known for their basketball. I think it's important. You did a great job of handicapping Indiana. I'm in complete 100% agreement. I wouldn't even mind playing under 7.5 at a juiced dog at plus 110. Works for me. So, I project this at 7, but there's just other things that really bother me about this team and some of the things that came out of their numbers from last year. They lost 2 points of power rating in their offseason. Power rating for me for second order win total, indicating that there was a bit of luck in that record of 6-2. They finished +8 in net turnovers through 8 games. And you mentioned that turnover regression is coming, but it's really interesting to look. If you look at the turnover battle in each individual game, the games that they won the turnover battle, they won. The games that they lost the turnover battle, they lost against Ohio State and Ole Miss in the bowl game. So Penn State, Michigan, Maryland, they all finished with more total yards than Indiana, but still lost the game because they lost the turnover battle. So there's just a lot of indicators here with Indiana that say that you cannot do as well as you just did. Am I a big fan of being 13th in havoc on defense? Sure. Top 10 in defensive finishing drive? Sure. But they're, the offense did not provide any rush explosiveness whatsoever. 98th in rushing success rate. Moving the chains is a real problem, and it's all dependent on their quarterback. Now he loses his top wide receiver target, his top leading, target. Miles Marshall is now the home run hitter in a stable of targets for Michael Penix Jr., assuming he's healthy to start the season. Now, he did get up to the podium at Big Ten Media Days. I'm healthy. I'm ready to go. But what's he going to get up there and say? Like, I'm still in pain. The sophomore quarterback, confirmed that he's going to be good to go at Kinnick. But that is not an easy start to the season, going to face the Iowa defense. Indiana finished outside the top 90 in success rate on both sides of the ball. And you're right. The changes won't change. Tom Allen's in control of that defense, no matter if they have a new coordinator. They averaged just 2.5 points to opponents that made it past the 40-yard line. I think that's sustainable. I think it's just that the turnovers, the number of successful drives on offense, missing out on their biggest target. The biggest hole to plug for Tom Allen's defense is line yards and stuff rate. They had ranks in the bottom 20, which is a little bit shocking to me when I look at their advanced stats. I mean, they're top 50 in almost everything and 13th in defensive havoc, but you're 113th in line yards and 117th in stuff rate, meaning teams can run on you all day. That doesn't make Illinois an easy win if they're just going to run the ball all the time and you're outside the top 100 in these advanced rushing stats. So, and you mentioned Western Kentucky. Holy cow, you're going to turn this into a Bailey Zappi Hilltopper podcast because that's all I want to talk about. But there are games on this schedule I am not in favor of Indiana winning. Iowa, Cincinnati, Maryland, who we're going to talk about, I think is on the rise. Michigan is not garbage. Minnesota and Purdue all represent games with projected lines within 4 points of a pick. So with that many coin flips, a game like week 1 against Iowa is crucial to the win total. So considering the Indiana secondary can handle Spencer Petras, I would say if you can win that game against Iowa, you're on your way to getting it over, but I'm just not confident in this team whatsoever. So I'm siding with you on the under.
Haven't won 9 games since 1967, Indiana. But I mean, look, their defense is going to keep them in games. They're going to be there, and they have a top 10 secondary, I think. Tywone Mullen is excellent and Jalen Williams, a great corner duo. But I just think this number is too high. That's the kind of the challengers in the East. Let's get to the rest. I'll let you take this one. Michigan over 7.5 minus 120. This is Jim Harbaugh, year 7. Just changes on defense. Don Brown is now gone. You're going to see them move to a different defensive scheme. On offense, it's Gaddis again, the pro spread, no huddle, year 3. Can they find a quarterback? Questions abound. The one positive thing, not many I can say, for Michigan, and their win total at BetMGM over 7.5 minus 120. Yeah, they were they were dead last in experience last year. So that, if you think, all right, this was one of the youngest teams in regards to experience in the nation last year, maybe there's a jump this year in certain positions. I think even the biggest Michigan fan out there would say that if everything went right this year, and it hasn't in a long time, this ceiling is 9-3. Like, they got Ohio State at home. We know they can't beat Ohio State. They're at Penn State and they're at Wisconsin. Like, that is where you're starting for your ceiling if everything goes right. So, yeah, if you like this over, you don't have much room for error. I kind of lean under here with Michigan. I'd still Michigan. I think that there's still some inflation because of the name Michigan. I'm right around 7, but I'll let you take Bodog Jim and your thoughts on the Wolverines.
It's really interesting. I guess it kind of depends on how old you are as a person. If you're a Gen Z or if you're a Zoomer, then you're probably pretty used to this kind of Michigan team. If you're a Gen Xer or a millennial, think about what you've gone through in the last 15 years. I mean, you've gone from a national title contender to a Big Ten contender to a team that has lost 4 straight bowl games. Jim Harbaugh fielded a 2-4 team that mercifully didn't have to play Ohio State last year. The defense ranked 110th in finishing drives and 120th in havoc. That is not Michigan football and not what we saw like 3 years ago. So, we're having a little bit of an identity crisis and things are not going in the right way. But if this is a stock market and you want to buy the dip, the question is this the dip? The Wolverines returned 70% of their defense. They just had 5.5 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks. Am I reading that for one player? No, I'm reading that for the team. Linebacker and nose tackle have fresh faces on the secondary that returns pieces that were torched last season. A coverage rank is 76th, is in combination with ranks outside the top 100 in pass explosiveness and finishing drives on defense. Opponents are scoring at will. They are moving the ball at will, and there needed to be a change of defensive coordinator. But is that going to solve everything? We have 70% of the defense returning. McDonald, the new defensive coordinator, comes in from the Baltimore Ravens. It's funny, the John to Jim Harbaugh move here, but McDonald has stated that we want to be multiple. We're going to go 3-4. We're going to go 4-3. We're going to go 6-1. And I'm thinking to myself, you just finished 120th in defensive havoc, and you're going to go in and put this playbook on these kids, and they're supposed to pick up the blitz, and there's going to be missed assignments. Whether they can learn the scheme. It's like, Dave Aranda goes into Baylor, and he's got 18 different variations of how he's running the 3-4 or a 2-5, 2-5-5. You expect these kids to pick it up on day one. I just don't think it works that way, especially with the defense that's been trending this direction. That remains to be seen. Offensively, I mean, Joe Milton's gone, Dylan McCaffrey transferred out, leaves Cade McNamara, and Texas Tech's transfer Alan Bowman. I mean, you and I kidded on previous podcasts that Alan Bowman, was the hot route quarterback because he was firing to his first look, but he was doing that because he was always injured, punctured lung, hospital time. I mean, I'd be throwing the ball as quick as I could also. So it'd be interesting to see what Alan Bowman can do behind an offensive line that went 18th in havoc allowed. That's a great number. 25th in offensive finishing drives. Hopefully they can put some points up on the board, but Milton's accuracy needed to go. McNamara had limited action last year. Biggest stat that sticks out for me is turnover-worthy plays. Of 72 dropbacks during 2020, the redshirt freshman logged just 1 turnover-worthy play. If you're looking to buy the dip on a Josh Gaddis offense, you want a kid that had 72 dropbacks and just 1 turnover-worthy play. That's the kind of stability that this offense needs. Now, I've double-checked the numbers. I mean, my win projection is 6. That's not a misprint if you go to Action Network and look at all of our win totals for every single college football team. I'm very low on this team. There's a new defensive coordinator. There's no havoc experience returning whatsoever. There's a new scheme. There's turnover at the skill positions on offense, quarterback. Coin flip games or spreads of 6 or less, right? When I say coin flip games, it means a spread is 6 or less, and that includes games against Washington, Nebraska, Indiana, Maryland. A double-digit spread against Rutgers. I'm not really sure Rutgers is the carpet of this league. You can just walk all over anymore. Shiano's got them rolling in the right direction. So the ceiling for this team is 9 wins. There's a high probability that Harbaugh finishes with 6 or 7, and that makes this an underplay for me. I'm sticking to my mathematics. And, we do this every summer when we cut our podcast. If you have a huge scheme change like this, and you have skill positions, you have to be explosive in college football. You have to be able to put points up on the board. And if you can't do either of those things, you're going to get trounced. And I just think Michigan is in the spot where they're not going to get to 8 wins.
Do not disagree with you there. Let's stay in the Great Lakes State and go to Michigan State. Sparty win total at BetMGM over 5 minus 115. Look, Mel Tucker was put in an almost impossible situation last year. After D'Antonio left, and the recruiting under D'Antonio at the end of his tenure was really starting to dwindle. And, it was ugly. Michigan State's, the offense in particular, 122nd in success rate, 125th in rush explosiveness. The O-line was bad. The quarterback play was poor. 19.6% turnover rate. That's second worst in FBS. Just nothing really went right on the offensive side of the ball. Is, Anthony Russo the answer? The Temple transfer? Is it Peyton Thorne? I'm not sure, but there's a lot of questions on offense. Outside of Naylor and Reed, they have promise at wide receiver. They do bring in Kenneth Walker from Wake Forest at running back, but there's questions on this offense. And then on defense, and look, just what is going on with Michigan State. Now, there's a ton of players left via the transfer portal. They also brought a lot in, and they're going to be very reliant on transfers on the defensive side of the ball, where they have to replace 3 stars, one on each level. Brown at corner, Simmons at linebacker, and Jones at defensive tackle. So there's a lot of work for Mel Tucker here. Like I said, win total is over 5 minus 115. If and they allowed over 35 points per game last year, most in school history. If you believe, now some of that you're going to hear that stat because they played a conference only schedule, but the defense just wasn't getting it done. The offense just didn't help them at all. If you believe in Anthony Russo and you think he's the savior, maybe you like this over 5. Not something I want to get involved with. What do you see with Sparty?
Well, the handicap starts with Rocky Lombardi has moved on to Northern Illinois. That's it. That's the cap. Anthony Russo coming in from Temple. You have to go back to his 2019 numbers because of last season. And, he has a really big arm. He had 21 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He can get himself in trouble with some of the decisions he makes, but he can hit Michigan State wide receivers down the field, something Rocky Lombardi never had a chance of doing. So there is a new element to the Michigan State offense. So we do have to recognize that, especially when they have ranks that are below 120. And I'm staring at Havoc allowed 120th, line yards 124th, finishing drives 127 is bad. It's all red. But Rocky Lombardi out and Anthony Russo in means that they're going to be able to make big time throws. Are there going to be interceptions still? Of course. At the pace of Rocky Lombardi, I'm not sure, because I've never seen a kid just so turnover prone. We've seen a few, and we haven't even got to the G5 podcast yet. So, we'll see what they can do on offense, but the Spartans rank of 120th and Havoc allowed, that may be the floor here. And we'll see if what they bring back in the 2 deep on the offensive line can correct some of that. Defensive coordinator Scott Hazelton came in from Kansas State with a ton of, we thought that he was going to fix everything on defense. And still, he didn't get them up off the mat. I think what's interesting about this team, what makes him hard to handicap, I know in the ACC preview, we talked about how Pitt was able to win games as underdogs and they were able to blow things as favorites. Last year, beating Michigan was ranked number 13 at the time in the second week of the year, beat them, and then beat Northwestern later on in the season. Northwestern was out of its mind, out of control, playing in the Big Ten championship last year. So pretty impressive stuff for Michigan State to be able to, turn around and get those wins. So listen, I think the defense is going to continue to get better. I think the upgrade from Lombardi to Russo is good, but this is a defensive-minded coach with a defensive coordinator still struggling for answers, with an offense that is looking to protect their quarterback. He's going to make mistakes. The projection for me on this team is 4.45. So the only play is an under 5. That is at BetMGM. Over 5 is minus 115, under would be minus 105. So that's the only play to make, but I'm not in a rush to go and fade this team, especially when your only 2 wins last year were against number 11 and number 13. That gives me pause to think, hey, they could pull something off here in this conference.
Moving on to another team in that group of the rest in the East, Maryland. At BetMGM, over 5.5, minus 145. Haven't had a winning record in a decade at Maryland, but this is, look, Mike Locksley, it's year 3, but he brought in a brand new staff, and but the recruiting is also up. Some of the recruits that they're bringing in has to give Maryland fans some hope about where this football team is headed. You bring Tagovailoa back at quarterback. The problem with this offense is it is so, and you could look at some of their results last year. They would lose by 40, or they would win and score 50. They would only score 3, and then they would score 50. Just very hit or miss, up and down, inconsistent. Not a lot of efficiency, but a lot of explosiveness. Ton of talent at the receiver position that they've brought in. Can Dan Enos, who I don't know, we're not the biggest fans of, increase that efficiency? You're probably going to see more play action, more screens out of the offense this year. And then on defense, it's the pass defense had a lot of promise last year and has a lot of potential. Can some of their highly touted recruits, Terrence Lewis, for example, a 5-star linebacker, can they step in and contribute on the defensive side of the ball for Maryland? It's a team with a lot of potential and a high ceiling this year if things go right because of the amount of talent they have. Can are the scheme changes a positive or do they hold them back? They need to get more consistent, more efficient. But if you look at their schedule, 4 of their first 5 are at home. That's a good thing when you're trying to implement some changes, build some momentum. And I'd argue all but one of their games are winnable. Like besides Ohio State. Would it shock you if I told you they won any other game on their schedule?
No, absolutely not.
So I would say that, again, it's a very Jekyll and Hyde team. They're starting at home against West Virginia, not an easy game. But you get Iowa at home. You get Indiana at home. You get Penn State at home. So your road game, you get Michigan at home. Your road games in conference are Michigan State, Rutgers, Minnesota, Illinois, outside of Ohio State. So very favorable schedule. You're getting your toughest opponents at home and your easiest opponents on the road. Maryland over 5.5 -145 at BetMGM. What do you got with the Terps?
Yeah, I mean, I project them. I'm buying them. I project them at 6.1. Obviously, this thing is juicing up, and maybe Maryland will get to 6 at some point. But I mean, that's the goal of this team of Mike Locksley is to get to a bowl game, and hopefully, with Dan Enos coming into town, he plays more of a clipboard holder. Maybe he helps out with the quarterback, similar to what he did at Alabama when Locksley was the offensive coordinator and Dan Enos was there to, I don't know, hopefully fetch water. But I mean, Locksley should be calling the plays. It's going to be the system that he ran at Alabama with Tua Tagovailoa, so he's going to be doing the Talia Tagovailoa here. So, it didn't give me pause that Enos is there because I know Locksley is the one in charge of this. And I think it's important to note that this defense returns 96% of its production last year. I know that they were 114th in finishing drives. They gave everything away when teams got past the 40-yard line, but they were 45th in defensive success rate. That means that they did stop the chains more often than not, and that is something to build on. Lots of explosive players on this team, especially on offense. Big piece being wide receiver Dante Demas. The defense, they've got playmakers too. And you mentioned the schedule. To me, there's 4 games where they should win: Rutgers, Illinois, Howard, Kent State. Kent State has 0 defense. I love their offense, but they have 0 defense. Illinois is a team that likes to rush the ball, but Maryland's going to be able to stop that. Illinois will have no passing attack whatsoever. And then there's Michigan State on the schedule, a game where Maryland should be about -5.5 to -6 against, another winnable game. And then a handful of these games are at home, so they're primed for upset. They're short dogs against Indiana, Minnesota. West Virginia is all defense. We don't think they're going to get much on offense there. So there is a lot of ways to get this win total to 6. And they end the season against Rutgers. If they're sitting on 5 wins, that's plenty of motivation to get to bowl season. And they're facing Rutgers. It's not like they're facing Ohio State or Penn State or somebody big. It's a win total you can hedge yourself out of. And that's what we like to look for here. And that's what we give with Maryland. So yeah, I am over 5.5. I take a pause at 6, but I do love the explosiveness on this team. I do love everything they return on defense. They get some success rate on both sides of the ball, especially on offense. They could be a little dangerous. Maybe they'll move up from the bottom 3 teams and into the top 4 teams in their division.
Speaking of Rutgers, to close out the East, over 4 -105 at BetMGM. Look, they ended a 20. Greg Schiano's there. I think he's going to turn this program around, get it back to where, just at least respectability. It's going to take some time. They ended a 21-game Big Ten losing streak last year and went 3-6, which is really good for where this Rutgers team was, 2-3 years ago. They were 3-6 with 3 one-possession losses. But this is a team that I think was a bit lucky last year due to, a lot of trick plays, turnover luck, and dominant special teams. Their special teams will be good again, but I just think all those things are probably unsustainable. The defense has some players. I like their corners and Young and Avery. They had Renee from UNC. Fadukasi's a stud at linebacker at 100+ tackles last year. And they could start 3-0, get some momentum at Rutgers. They open at Temple at home, at Syracuse, and then home against Delaware. So the total of 4, you'd be sitting in a good spot if you get 3-0. And, you probably have to then beat a Maryland to close the year, Michigan State at home. Or you're going to have to steal one on the road at Northwestern or at Illinois. So it won't be easy, but that'll help you. That you really got to get off to a fast start if you're Rutgers. But I think that there's, the recruiting's improving. Schiano has this headed in the right direction. Gleason is back as an offensive coordinator. Why is that important? Going into last year, Gleason was their 11th offensive coordinator in 11 years. So they finally have at least some stability. But the offense, I think, it's still a mess to me. The defense has some problems. They were top 20 last year in tackles for loss and turnovers. I just don't know if they're going to be able to duplicate, the trick plays, the turnovers. You remember that Michigan State game, as good of special teams play as last year. This is a pass team for me. I think Schiano has it headed in the right direction, but it's going to take some time. What do you see with Rutgers?
Yeah, it's a pass team for me too at 4.6 for their projected win total. It's all moving in a positive direction. The fact that they were able to get as many wins last year speaks to the power, the great move they did to go back and get Schiano, have him come in-state recruiting. And I think one of the best moves he made was to go down and say, hey, Sean Gleason, you were once the highest scoring coach in FCS at Princeton, and you went down to Stillwater. Why don't you come up and be my offensive coordinator? And, coming back to New Jersey, that was a pretty easy decision for Gleason. I think the reason that you use a bunch of trick plays or you move the pocket is because you just don't have the talent to just line up and run it down people's throats. And, Rutgers played extremely hard. There is a lot about Rutgers and Arkansas that remind me so much of each other. Their advanced splits are outside the top 100 and everything, but they play hard for their coach. They believe in the direction that they're going. And now they have Noah Vedral, and he's got to increase his efficiency. Rutgers was 108th in passing success rate, but he ended the season with more touchdowns than interceptions. That is a massive upgrade for some of the quarterbacks they've had in the past. And if you look at some of the numbers, like the zones that he threw to, he had a better passing grade in 39 attempts over 20 yards than the 93 attempts that he had between 0 and 9 yards. So it's really, you can expect Rutgers to be able to complete some big explosive plays to people like Bo Melton, who leads upperclassmen receivers. And there could be a push in expected points with these guys on offense. Now, Schiano's known for his defense, defensive coordinator at Ohio State for 3 years, previously here at Rutgers. They improved a little bit across the board, but they got 90% of their defense coming back. The front seven is led by linebackers Fudukasi, Tyson Fogg, the edge Mike Teverdov, combined for 18 tackles for loss and 8 sacks. Any opponent on the schedule that is run-based and cannot go downfield may have issues against the Rutgers front seven. The win total, like we said, set at 5. I'm just a little shade under that, so there's really no play here for me. But there's a case I can make that they take a step forward. The schedule includes Temple and Delaware, games where Rutgers will be favored by double digits. 2 other games are coin flips, Michigan State and Syracuse. For Rutgers to get over the win total, they're going to need underdog wins against Illinois, Maryland, and Michigan State. And then when you sit there and consider that, the Terrapins and the Spartans have plenty of skill on the outside, and the Rutgers secondary, it may be a tough to make a case that they can get to 6 wins. Now with Illinois, I think they can beat them because Illinois is going to be one-dimensional and run the ball more than anybody else. And that goes to the skill set of the Rutgers defense. So I think 5 is the right number. We're still heading in a positive direction. This isn't a team we just can't line up and bet against every week anymore. I think Schiano's got them going in the right direction. They continue on that path. Yeah,
the recruiting class for 2022 looks really promising for Rutgers. I think they got a hard commit from Gavin Wimsatt, a quarterback out of actually down by me in Owensboro, Kentucky. I think he's the top 10. He's a 4-star top 10 quarterback in the class for next year. So it's not guaranteed that it'll go there, and the class overall looks great. So it's heading in the right direction. Vedral's been better than some of the quarterbacks that they've had with Art Sikowski and some of those clowns. But it's still the position that's going to hold them back until they get, one of these big quarterback recruits that sticks, and they might have one on the way. All right, let's move over to the West. The way that I kind of tier the West, the contenders are Wisconsin and Iowa. Next tier is Minnesota, Northwestern, Nebraska, and then kind of your meh are Purdue and Illinois. This has been a division that has produced surprise winners over the past few years. A lot of times it ends up being Northwestern, but let's start at the top with Wisconsin and Iowa. Paul Chryst back for year 7 and Kirk Ferentz back for year 23, I believe. So you have some coaches that have been here for a while. Chryst did make some staff changes here. I know he'll be the quarterback coach. He'll call plays. Hopefully they can just produce some more explosive plays. They're 127th in the nation in 30-plus yard plays. But a lot of that, look, they were crushed by COVID last year, Wisconsin. And Graham Mertz, the quarterback, was he healthy? No. How much better will he be being healthy? That's a question we have to answer. Iowa gets Petrus back at quarterback. Both defenses should be very good. What do you see at the top of the West Division in the Big Ten? By the way, Iowa over 8.5 minus 105, and Wisconsin over 9.5 minus 125 at BetMGM.
Yeah, Wisconsin, I make 9.9, so over 9.5 is where the lean would be. And then with Iowa, I'm actually a little bit under that at 7.7. And really that game, Iowa goes to visit Wisconsin, and really you have to ask yourself, do you believe, are you just going to read the stats and believe the stats that you saw from Wisconsin last year? Or are you going to go look a little bit between the lines and see how excellent they were against Illinois in the opener, especially Graham Mertz? And then COVID played a factor. The offensive line, had to deal with that. There was injuries in there, especially to Graham Mertz. And that would explain why Jalen Berger was, averaging a mass ton of highlight yards and yards after contact. And then, completely fell off the map. I believe he averaged over 5.13 yards after contact against Michigan. And that number came down when the offensive line started to get their toll. So, Berger has the burst and Mertz has the arm. But I think if you just purely stare at the stats from last season, you'd think, oh, Wisconsin fell off a cliff. They must be having some regression and they're going to come back to the pack. I kind of think the opposite. I think COVID and everything that had to do with with college football in general and life in general with the pandemic, everything just kind of piled on top of Wisconsin. And when making the Duke's Mayo Bowl was a really big deal to them. And I think they overcame a lot of stuff off the field, and it showed in how much they loved being at Duke's Mayo Bowl and celebrating after the win. So, with the exception of corner,
and they have their receivers were hurt too. Davis and Pryor were out both year. They're seniors, and this you could say the same when we get to Iowa. This is a team that's well coached. Have a coach that's been there forever. They're a development team, right? They value the spring. They value developing players and having players there for a long time. They missed that last year. And in the case of Iowa, you saw them really come on strong at the end of the year. I think they won 6 straight to close the year. But go back to the Badgers.
Well, I think the difference between the love for Wisconsin versus I like Iowa, they're in the friendship zone, is the fact that Wisconsin loses just one player, Rashad Wildgoose, going to the Bills. Besides that, Wisconsin's defense remains completely intact. Over 83%. And this is a unit that is very high in success rate year in and year out. Even last year, I mean, they carried the water for Wisconsin last year. The offense couldn't move the chains for anything. So, but when you pivot over to Iowa, it's a different story, right? We've lost a lot in the front seven for a team that is generally defensive based. They're good in every unit, but they do lose a lot in the front seven. And that makes me a little bit nervous. I do love Spencer Petrus as a quarterback. I mean, absolutely the guy. He returns for his sophomore season. He has a huge arm. I'm not sure Iowa has the explosive playmakers on the outside to make the big plays for him now that they have lost some of their top targets. The tight ends will be good. He'll be supported. Petrus will be supported by 2 other sophomore running back, Tyler Goodson and tight end Sam Laporta, but they lose some key players on offense. And Spencer Petrus may take the next step. And he's definitely got a cannon for an arm, but who's going to be there to catch these 20-plus yard passes? His quarterback rating. I think what else is interesting is when you're handicapping Iowa this year, I won't get too deep into it, but Spencer Petrus on deep right corner past 20 yards was impeccable, flawless. He couldn't hit his blind side past 20 yards. He couldn't hit in between the hashes. All 4 touchdowns that were explosive plays came deep right zone. And the reason why I mentioned that is there are teams that have shut down corners that play on either, one side of the field, and that's all they play. So keep that in mind when you're handicapping Iowa individual games. Take a look at their corners and specifically look who plays on the right side of the field, because Petrus's number on the right was fantastic. So like I said about the defense, they were 12th in coverage ranking in PFF. I expect that to continue because that's just how they coach their teams. They were top 5 national rank in defensive EPA. They keep everything in front of you, so you can't get really some big bombs on them. And the beef of the defensive front seven has moved on. Like I said, Chauncey Golston, Nick Niemann, those are big losses for me. So I am on the Iowa under. I don't think they beat Wisconsin for the division. I still think that they're going to be fantastic against some of their other teams. I put them above, Indiana. I put them above, some of the teams on their schedule from Iowa State to Wisconsin to Penn State. I think Iowa is going to do some damage here. It's just not going to be against Wisconsin.
Yeah, and Wisconsin has all their tough games at home. I mean, Wisconsin's road games this year are at Illinois. They're true road games. At Illinois, at Purdue, at Rutgers, and at Minnesota. That is it. They have 4 true road games. Now, they also play Notre Dame in Chicago, but that's their 4 true road games. They get all their tough games at home. I mean, if I wanted to tout for Iowa, they only had 6 practices last year. They're the 5th youngest team, and they almost went undefeated. They lost their final 6. Their only 2 losses were by 5 total points, and they blew leads late. But it's a tough schedule this year. They get Iowa, they get Indiana and Penn State out of the East, and they play at Wisconsin, which is what I think is going to ultimately decide this division. The defense, they did lose a lot in the front 7, even though they were so young. They've gone 22 straight games, by the way, allowing 25 points or fewer. That's the longest current streak in FBS. I do have also questions about the offensive line. They've lost a lot on the offensive line over the past 2 years. Now, I know Linderbaum's one of the best centers in the country, and Ferentz usually just he was an ex-NFL, he was an ex-offensive line coach in the NFL. He usually just gets these guys up to speed and finds offensive linemen. But I don't know if the offensive line is going to be as good as it has been in recent years. They lost some talent on the outside as well. I'm a little higher on Iowa than you, but not for an overplay. I have a play on the division that I'll get to later on. Let's get to the second tier in the West: Minnesota, Northwestern, and Nebraska. Northwestern over 6.5 minus 105. It's too high for me, way too high for me, but I don't want any part of the under. Maybe I'll find a way to play against them. And Pat Fitzgerald in year 16, it makes me feel old that he's been there for 16 years. Just signed a 10-year contract, I believe. But they've lost a ton. They lost as much as anybody in the country. It's one of the lowest returning productions in the nation. But this is the team that just always overperforms. They just find ways to voodoo a couple games. So I'm not tying up my money on a Northwestern under, even though I like it. But they have a lot of questions on both sides of the ball. They were the number 2 most experienced team last year, and they lose a ton. I mean, you lose 2 of the 3 Irish law firm linebackers, lose your top 4 wide receivers. I mean, it goes on and on and on. They do avoid the top 3 out of the East, and they get Iowa at home. It's one of the reasons you're seeing the 6.5 out there. But I have a lot of questions about this Northwestern team, but they find ways to ugly up games and win. Talking about Nebraska, Scott Frost, questions about this offense. Adrian Martinez, can this offense and Scott Frost find it? Maybe there's a resurrection of the black shirt D. There's some potential on this defense. Over 6 minus 120 for Nebraska. And finally, in that kind of second tier in the West, Minnesota over 7 minus 110. PJ Fleck, can he row the boat with the Gophers? Tanner Morgan is back. Didn't have a great year in 2020. They've lost a lot of talent at the wide receiver position over the past 2 years. Lots of questions for Minnesota as well. So this is a very interesting tier in the West to me of Minnesota, Northwestern, Nebraska, because I've heard interesting cases of people being high and low on each of them. So where do you stand? Take it where you want to go.
Yeah, I don't like any of these 3 teams, but I think 2 of them are actionable. One of them's a stay away for me. And I'll start with Northwestern at 6.5. I mean, this is a projection that I make at 4.4, but does Pat Fitzgerald like to make me look bad and take money out of my pocket every time you count these guys out? Fitzgerald's got something up his pocket. And, I think what's interesting about this offense is they're going from a dink and dunk style with Peyton Ramsey to an extreme dink and dunk style with Ryan Helinski. The South Carolina import had just 6 snaps last year, but if you go back to 2019, 236 pass completions, only 40 of them went longer than 9 yards. I will repeat that because when I read this stat, I was like, this can't be true. 236 pass completions in 2019, 40 of them were longer than 9 yards. The top 4 targets from 2020 have moved on from Northwestern, and the offensive front that ranked 120th in line yards is still there. And Northwestern has 28% returning on offense. So it's just not a good look for me, right? Even if you have explosive players, which they don't, even if you had your offensive line there, which you don't, you have a quarterback that never throws it past 9 yards down the field. Big problem. If you look at the defense, I mean, that was the MVP of 2020, right? The leading Havoc players, Patty Fisher, gone. Key pieces from one of the best secondaries also had their college clock expire. They have a TARP of 50%. That's transfer activity, returning production combined. The national average is 77%. They're down at 50. I mean, that's a huge problem in the year that's going to be called the super senior. So the Wildcats should regress from a finishing drives rank of second and a success rate of 20th. And, it's just not, I don't see the wins getting to 7 here on the schedule. We've been fooled by Northwestern before, but there's a lot of reasons why we knocked them down in power rating from second order win total. Just not just the returning experience. Indiana State, that's the only win on the schedule. I mean, it's the only clear-cut win. Is Duke going to come back from the depths? Ohio and Rutgers, Northwestern will be no greater than a touchdown against those two teams. I would rather catch Ohio in the first game of the season than later on after they find an identity. But Rutgers is a team on the rise with Schiano. So the Wildcats will be underdogs in their final 6 games. They will be underdogs, clear-cut underdogs. So I don't understand this win total of 6.5 when you
that means they'll go
6-0.
That means they'll go 6-0. Yeah.
Yeah, but and so if you go 6-0 in the first half, you're still going under 6.5. So under 6.5, I'd play it all the way down to 5.5. I don't think it's getting enough attention, and I think people are still in love with players that have left. And the Ryan Helinski thing, amazing. But Nebraska is a thing where I'm not going to get deep into the stats. This is really a thing where on two sides of the ball, Adrian Martinez is still playing quarterback, and he has not resolved his issues with turning the ball over. And Eric Shenander is still calling a 3-4 boomer bust defense where they can't get stops. They try to blitz and make big plays happen. They have increased their success rate. They have a better defense. They have players in the secondary, and they have players in the front 7. But the style of defense worked at Central Florida against group of 5 teams. It is not translated at Nebraska whatsoever. You can hold your opponents and you can get stops. You can get some third down stops, but they still give up some explosive plays. And in the long run, when they're playing Ohio States of the world, anybody with explosive players, it just hasn't worked. So Nebraska is not a team that I'm aiming to bet on whatsoever. Yeah, so I mean, the Gophers over 7 -110 at BetMGM. I mean, they had a defensive dip for the ages in 2020. They ranked 123rd in success rate and 117th in havoc on defense. I mean, this is not the Minnesota defense from a couple of years ago, and now they return 87% of that unit. So are they going to improve? I mean, there has to be all these numbers are outside the top 100. Sack rate, line yards, just 18 tackles for loss. Like, they couldn't even accidentally get into the backfield of their opponents last year. So, of the top tacklers from 2020, 15 of 16 return. Is that a good thing? I mean, that's one thing that I just don't understand is like, yeah, we return a lot, but you didn't get a lot out of these guys last year. And, Joe Rossi is the defensive coordinator. He took over the role in 2018 as an interim before he took the role full-time in 2019. And Rossi was given a 1-year extension this past May. It is a head scratcher to me. I don't know how you could do your job more poorly and get extended for another year. It's a PJ Flex program. So from an offensive perspective, the Gophers dipped with transition from Kirk Soraka to Mike Sanford Jr. That was predictable. We said that last year. Mike Sanford Jr., not a guy to bet on. We have said that for years. Why? He was a part of the Notre Dame staff for a couple of years where they went all the way down to 4-8. After that, he went to Western Kentucky. He was barely there long enough to make enough money to pay his rent. He had 1 year at Utah State. It was their worst year that they had after, all the Jordan Love and the Chucky Keatons and all the success Utah State had. Not there when Mike Sanford was there. Everywhere he has gone. And this is not, I'm not going to go deep into the stats. I'll save it for the write-up on Action Network. Everywhere Mike Sanford Jr. has gone as an offensive mind, the success rate has taken a massive dip. The explosiveness has taken a massive dip. He is not getting it done as an offensive coordinator. And for that reason, Minnesota is going to be one-dimensional. Mohamed Ibrahim returns.
The offensive line is massive. He'll get his yards.
Offensive line is massive. They're going to run the ball. So you look around. Who can we beat? Well, Minnesota can give Iowa problems because the front 7 is missing out a little bit. You can give anybody that's missing some defensive front 7 some problems, but you can't beat everybody with just this one single game plan of one-dimensional running. And Mike Sanford Jr. just ain't going to get it done from a passing perspective. So I'm out on Minnesota. I mean, the projected win total is 7.6. It mathematically says I shouldn't be playing this, but I don't like Mike Sanford Jr. And I don't like the offense, and I don't like what they don't return. And Joe Rossi getting a 1-year extension makes 0 sense to me. So prove me wrong, PJ Fleck. Take my money out of my pocket, but I'm not taking the over here, and I'm strongly considering taking an over. I am going to play an under here. I don't like Mike Sanford Jr. He's been a moneymaker in the past by fading him, so I'm going to do it again.
Yeah, they were an interesting team last year in that they lost 2 games in overtime because of missed kicks. So they did bring in Trickett from Kent State, which should help their kicking game. But their opponents went 5 of 14 on field goals, which was the 3rd lowest in FBS. And they should have lost to Purdue on that ridiculous PI. Remember that offensive PI call that they called in that game? They should have lost that game. They allowed 6.3 yards per carry last year. Yikes. They did simplify the D late, and it got a little better, but there's a lot of questions on this defense. You're right. They got no tackles for loss. Just nothing in the backfield. Tackle for loss percentage, dead last in the nation. Dead last.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that is something to mention. And the year before that, I think they were 113th. And then last year they went to dead last, tackles for loss per game. Like, it's just striking to me. The whole thing is striking to me, what's going on at Minnesota. I think one thing that we need to point out, a big handicap of why I want to take the under, is look at who they play on their schedule, and will they be able to contain the Minnesota rushing attack. Miami of Ohio is a must win, but they have a top 4 front 7 defense in the MAC. Colorado has the #1 ranked linebackers in all of Pac-12. And when you look at their cross-division games, Maryland might not have the front 7 to handle Minnesota, so Minnesota can get a win there. But Indiana has one of the best front 7s in all of the Big Ten. So it's just not a schedule where I think they're going to be able to do a whole bunch of damage with this one-dimensional offensive attack. Colorado, I mean, that's a sneaky play with Colorado and their linebackers. Miami of Ohio has a good front 7 for who they are. Indiana, you're not going to be able to run on Indiana's front 7. So, yeah, under here for me.
Let's move on to the final 2 teams in the West. We'll start with Purdue. Purdue over 5 -120 at BetMGM. Official odds provider of the Action Network podcast. Jeff Brom, year 5, 6-12 the past 2 years. At least they were in every game last year. They were robbed against Minnesota. New defensive coordinator for the 3rd straight year. My question, they want to be more aggressive. I mean, last year, 5 sacks for the whole year, 5 sacks, 125th in sack rate on D, 123rd in explosive play rate allowed. The offense also has no explosiveness. So, you're going to they have both their quarterbacks who split time coming back this year in Aiden O'Connell and Jack Plummer. And they're going to be throwing to David Bell, who's excellent. And they're going to have to throw it to him 50 times to get down and score a touchdown. They have to just keep throwing for 8, and then on 3rd downs, you have to keep completing. You can't have any mistakes. No explosiveness in offense. New defensive coordinator, new defensive staff. They want to get more aggressive. That's what they're saying, and they need to. They implemented a 4-3 in spring, so there's some defensive changes. They're going to bring in some transfers to try to help that defense. Just this team overall, it just seems kind of soft. I don't know what their identity is. I mean, is their identity short passes? And I think so. They have some brutal road games on their schedule. You're at Notre Dame, you're at Iowa, you have Wisconsin at home, which was probably a loss. You're at Ohio State. So you're talking about a ceiling of probably 7 if everything goes right. You better beat out Oregon State and then win at Connecticut to start off 2-0. But I think if everything goes right, you're most likely looking at a team that has 5 wins heading into the finale at home against Indiana. So, this is a team that has a lot of questions on defense. Their offense is just it's not a sustainable way to go up and down the field, especially when you don't have a Rondell Miller and a David Bell. So I think this number is about right. If you like Purdue and you think they're going to get the bowl eligibility, I think it's probably going to come down to that Indiana game to end the year. Thoughts on the Boilermaker?
I like Purdue football. I like betting on Purdue football. I like watching Purdue offense. We have for years, but you got to play a little bit of defense. So I think it's best that I start off there. Brad Lambert slides in as a defensive coordinator role, and he's got plenty to work with. The Boilermakers were 125th in coverage and 126th in sack rate. They created 0 pressure. They had 0 ability to close the gap on balls in flight, and the havoc rating of 105th must improve. And there's a good chance of it. If you think COVID had to do with everything, I mean, COVID had a ton of players out from the counting stats, the defensive front 7. I mean, even Jeff Brom himself couldn't coach a game, and his brother had to coach a game for the first time ever. So, I mean, it's just a thing where the team really struggled with the pandemic season. George Karlaftis will look to return to form as all NFL eyes are on him. So, when havoc has come on this side of the ball the last 2 seasons, it's been in the front 7. But, like you said, 5 sacks in 6 games is just not going to get it done. But the hiring of Lambert may give us a little bit of reason to think that that's going to change. Last year at Marshall, the Herd finished top 10 in plenty of defensive categories: rushing success rate, rush explosiveness, coverage, and second in the nation in tackling. That's right. Marshall last year, of all the teams who played football, defensively finished second in tackling per PFF. That tells me that is a direct correlation to coaching. That is a direct correlation to Brad Lambert. And that's why I'm positive that his 4-3 front is going to be able to stabilize this defense. He has a little bit of a wrinkle with his 4-3. His weak side defensive end generally stands up and floats around. I know we talked about the bullet position with Ohio State, but Lambert can give a different look. Now, that player is going to be DeMarcus Mitchell, who transferred in from Southwest Mississippi Community College before 2020. I think he's a player that gets that hybrid position. And Lambert, in my opinion, from Marshall, is a sneaky good hire. This is somebody, just without even talking about the offense, I think, betting over 5 when I projected at 6, based on that alone, they're going to come back and be better on defense. You're right. David Bell returns. Milton Wright is going to turn heads in college fantasy leagues. And there's just a set of tight ends here that are going to be able to have big plays. Not a lot of success rate here for Purdue, but Purdue does have one thing that most teams don't, and that's experience at the quarterback position. Jack Plummer and Aiden O'Connell, they have plenty of experience as backups for a number of years. They combined for a 25-4 TD to INT ratio. And it's good news for an offense that has one of the lowest rush rates in the nation at 36%. Jeff Brom wants to throw more than anybody. You're right, Stuck. It's not sustainable. It's exciting, but I see huge jump on the defensive side of the ball with Brad Lambert. The schedule includes UConn, Northwestern, Michigan State, Illinois. These are all expected wins with spreads 7 or less. UConn may be a little bit higher. I think coin flips against Minnesota, Nebraska, and Indiana are what's going to determine this win total. But I'm looking at the schedule. I don't see how it lands on 4, right? I mean, 5 maybe, but 6 is where the projection is. And I think we're not talking enough what Brad Lambert's going to do with this defense.
My prediction is Purdue beats Indiana to end the season to get to 6 wins and bowl, but I'll just play them in that game, and it'll help, and then it'll cash my Indiana win total under. And Indiana win total under could still go under even if Indiana wins that game, which is why I'm playing the Indiana win total under. That's my prediction there. All right, let's close up the Big Ten with your boy, Brett Bielema, and the Illinois Fighting Illini. Win total over 3.5, -130 at BetMGM. Obviously, with a new staff here, it just wasn't happening with Lovie Smith. Brandon Peters back at quarterback, his 6th year in college. I don't know who he's throwing to. The Williams, their quarterback last year, I think he might start at receiver. There's a chance of that. But this is a Bielema offense, so it's going to be a power rushing attack, focus on tight ends, offensive line, and that's what they want to do. Illinois obviously was hurt by COVID last year too. Yes, I get it, Illinois fans, the 3 of you out there. So the defense was just horrific. And this is one area where I think they're going to have an identity. Now, how quickly can they implement all of this in year 1 of Bielema? You're going to be a rushing offense. And on defense, they want to be aggressive and play a lot more man. New defensive coordinator Ryan Walters is going to 3-4 base. They were so bad on early downs, pass defense. They just played a 4-3 cover 2 shell all the time. It was the most predictable defense under Lovie Smith, just an outdated dinosaur when it comes to calling defenses at the college level. So I think that just scheme-wise on the defensive side of the ball, for a defense that has been horrid in recent years, this is a team that has the most promise that can jump in production just from changing the scheme. So I love Jake Hansen at linebacker. But there's a lot of questions with this team. Can they play that aggressive style? Because the pass D was so bad last year. So there's going to be a lot of focus on how the corners perform. Over 3.5, -130. You look at their schedule. You start at home against Nebraska and UTSA. Winnable games. That's going to go a long way in determining where you go. You're hosting Maryland and you're at Virginia, and you have Charlotte at home. And then the schedule gets, pretty tough late, but there's some winnable games on this schedule. You finish with Northwestern at home. You have Rutgers at home later in the year. So there's some winnable games on the schedule. It's a question of how this is going to be a drastic turnaround that Bielema wants to do. He wants to come in and establish his identity, wholesale changes on the defensive side of the ball from a scheme perspective. So there's a lot of questions. It's tough to do in year one. What are your thoughts on your boy Bielema?
Oh, my boy Brett Bielema. So surprisingly enough, with all the nice things I had to say with him at the beginning of the podcast, I'm actually going to put a little sunshine on the Illinois program because I think 3.5 is a little bit too low. And the question with Illinois is Bielema is not the kind of coach that comes in and says, well, these are the players I have on hand, so these are the kind of plays that I'm going to run until I get my guys in. This is not how he works. He's going to come in, and he doesn't care if his offensive line all weigh 240 pounds. He's going to try to pound the ball. So the question is what do they have on hand, and will it work? So 84% of the offense from transfer activity and returning production come back in. That includes a rank of 105th in success rate and 113th in finishing drives. Not very good numbers. With a Bielema team, that the goal will be to pound the rock in standard downs and pound the rock in passing down. So it doesn't matter that Brandon Peters doesn't have anyone to throw to, or maybe he can't even make those passes. They're going to run the ball 3rd and 9. So, and I think the question is Tony Peterson the offensive coordinator? And if you have any like mixed feelings and you think that they're going to pass the ball, and that I'm just saying this because Brett Bielema likes to run the ball, they went out and got Tony Peterson as the offensive coordinator. He just comes in after this, doing the same role at App State where they ran the ball over 64%. So the writing is on the wall. This is going to be a heavy rush unit. And if you're in college fantasy, don't be drafting the Illinois wide receivers. And he's got a long history of improving rush attacks everywhere he's been, from East Carolina, La Tech, Marshall. This is a big jump for him up in job title and program that he's at, but he's proved it before. The offensive line returns almost everyone except Kendrick Green, who's now on the Steelers roster. So Bielema has a stable of offensive linemen who are big and can play in this conference, but he's got a lot of unproven backs. Western Michigan transfer Chase Brown, maybe not big enough, kind of a shifty back. Arkansas, East Carolina transfer Chase Hayden. I haven't even thought of Chase Hayden until I read about him here, transferring into Illinois. Was a shifty back at Arkansas, but just did not have the beef to play many games. So we'll see what his size is coming into camp. But that's what Bielema is going to do. There's no doubt. And the defense, has some really low marks in just about everything, from what they returned to what they did on the field last year. Defense coordinator Ryan Walters moves in from Missouri, but there's just not a lot here to believe in. Missouri's rank of 126th in finishing drives last year is certainly a stat that's like, it's not wanting me to back Illinois spreads or back Illinois unders, because the defense I do not think is going to improve, because the defensive coordinator didn't prove that he could do it before. Illinois' wins and losses are going to be determined by the ability to run 5+ minute sustained drives on the ground and score once they get past the 40-yard line. And you have to go and look at who they play on their schedule. Nebraska is going to have a bottom half defensive front 7 in the Big Ten. UTSA does have a top 4 front in Conference USA, but Virginia might have the worst linebackers in the ACC. Maryland and Minnesota are easily the 2 worst defensive front 7s heading into the season, especially Minnesota. Just smoking crater, couldn't be any worse. So there's chances for Illinois to get wins on this schedule. Even if they're coin flip games, there are just mismatches already that I see where defensive fronts are not going to be able to contain whatever Bielema is going to do from a double tight set, or he's going to do from pounding the rock. Underdogs against Maryland, Nebraska, Northwestern, Virginia, all winnable games. The over 3.5 is the play. Listen, what I have to say about Brett Bielema at the beginning of the podcast comes from somebody that donates to the Razorback program. But I got news for you. I love my wallet more than anything else. And I think this team is completely being undervalued. I don't think they can do anything on defense, but what Bielema wants to do is a huge mismatch for a lot of teams on this schedule. So I think 4 is easily attainable.
I think that I don't disagree with you, but I disagree with you on the defensive side. I think that their scheme was so bad last year that there's going to be a bump there regardless. But it's funny that there's an ex-Arkansas running back running for Bielema here for Illinois.
Yeah.
And you're pumping them out. But they have good tight ends, Luke Ford and Daniel Barker. And the receivers are just so bad. Like, teams are going to be stacking the box against them. I think Navarro might be their second receiver as a former walk-on. Williams, their ex-quarterback, moving to receiver might be I think Hightower's the Miami transfer is their best receiver. It's the receivers are bad. So I don't know if they can get any balance. And you're just going to have loaded boxes. But I don't disagree with you. I think it's over or nothing here with the Illini. All right, before we get out of here, great stuff. Covered every team. But let's kind of wrap it up by going 3 and out. All right, first down. Let's go with our favorite win total. I will start. I'm going to say Indiana under 8 wins. Look, I talked about the schedule at Iowa, Cincy, at Penn State, Ohio State at home, but Ohio State's off of a bye. At Maryland and at Michigan and at Purdue, those aren't gimmies. Then at Western Kentucky, in the middle of your Cincinnati and Penn State games, and Western Kentucky's off of a bye. Just landmines all over this schedule, which I think is very difficult. I think there's some regression coming for this Indiana team in the turnovers and red zone departments. Look, they could have a top 20, top 25 year and go 7-5, which is where I think this team ultimately ends up. I make their win total about 7.1. And there's reasons why I want to fade this team. So I bought under 8. And that's all assuming Michael Penix stays healthy all year long. And he's had 3 season-ending injuries. We'll see how he can do. I've had 2 ACL tears as well. It's not easy psychologically. Hopefully he can stay healthy for Indiana fans' sake. But I do not think this is the first time Indiana gets to 9 wins in the past, 50-plus years. So I'm going Indiana under 8. Where are you headed?
I'm going to join you on that, but I've got 2 win totals, and I just can't decide which one I like better. So let's go with the fate of Michigan. I'm going to go under 7.5. It's a win total. I make it 6. Not a believer in Jim Harbaugh. Josh Gaddis was supposed to be the next coming of everything offensive coordinators could be, bringing the style from Alabama up to Michigan. It has not happened. We've got questions at quarterback. We've got questions on defensive schemes. We got so many questions, and Harbaugh is long enough into this tenure. There shouldn't be questions. We are going in the wrong direction. And I think that's going to continue. And this win total, it's interesting because I feel, and I don't like to say I think and I feel stuff, but to be honest, I feel like this win total is a reflection of where some of the consumer base is, right? There are a lot of people betting in the state of Michigan. There are a lot of people betting in New Jersey, state of Michigan, and Las Vegas. And I'm not sure Michigan football is ever going to be allowed to be what their actual win total is. So I know my projection is well lower, and I've looked at other power ratings, people I trust, and, SP Plus is below 7.5. So I don't like this everything about the Michigan thing I don't like. And I think the number was put there because they know that there's going to be an appetite for the over on this team, no matter what they put on the field. So under on Michigan for all the analytics we said before, also under for that reason. But hey, I'm going to help you out with your Indiana bet, and I'm going to take Purdue over 5. To me, this is still a very exciting team. It's not the most talented 2 sets of quarterbacks, but they're experienced, and I like their TD to INT ratio. They dealt with so much off the field. I don't, from a COVID perspective, just like Wisconsin, I'm going to go with Purdue over 5. This is a team I think can get to 5. And then we've got motivation the rest of the year to get to 6 and make a bowl, and hopefully that's over Indiana.
And all right, good stuff there. Moving on to second down. It's our favorite Big Ten future. I'm going, and this is something I played, Wisconsin to win the West. I got them plus 110. I think it's even money minus 110 now. I know playing the favorite in the West is a risky proposition in the Big Ten. There's usually surprises, and this means that Northwestern's probably going to go undefeated and win the West this year. But I think it's between them and Iowa, looking at the rosters, and I think Wisconsin has a better roster, and Wisconsin hosts Iowa. Wisconsin has all their tough games at home this year, only 4 true road games, all winnable. I think, COVID and injuries to key skill position players really, really just hurt them last year. Graham Mertz, I think, will be much better. There is some subjective input here on how I'm projecting Mertz, but I think he'll be much better now that he's healthy. There's going to be some running game. I love Jim Leonard in that defense, which returns a ton. If it comes to this, Wisconsin hosts Iowa. I think they win that game. That's the difference in the division. I think Wisconsin wins the West. I'm going with the favorite.
Yeah, and I'm going to back you up on that, and I'm going to put a little bit more on it. I mean, if these 2 teams, Wisconsin and Iowa, were to play each other on a neutral site, you'd be looking at a point spread about 3.5 to 4.5 right now in favor of Wisconsin. This isn't being played at a neutral site. This is being played at one of the toughest places in college football to play. So, there are mismatches I think Wisconsin has advantages in. So this number at minus 115 at BetMGM, it needs to be bet. It needs to be bet a lot more. And considering what the point spread would be, in a projection right now of Iowa and Wisconsin. This is a playable line up to minus 150. So I think it's got a lot of room to be hit right now.
Where are you going for your future?
I'm joining you, Wisconsin
okay.
minus 115. Yeah, I'm not only just backing you up, I'm telling you you should buy this up to 150.
Perfect. Consensus on the future. I completely agree. And let's finish up with third down. It's our Big Ten Conference Championship prediction. I'll start here. Look, like the ACC, it's the Big Ten. There's not many surprises here. It's college football, your power conferences. Guess what? Clemson wins the ACC. Ohio State wins the Big Ten. Not going out on a limb here. I've already just told you that I really think Wisconsin wins the West. So obviously I'm going Ohio State over Wisconsin. My prediction is Ohio State wins. Wisconsin covers, and it's a competitive game.
Yeah, and I'm going to stick with you here. I mean, there's no reason for me to veer outside of Ohio State and Wisconsin being the Big Ten champions. I think it was the first piece I wrote like back in March. I'm like, as the sun rises in the East, Ohio State and Wisconsin are going to meet each other again in the Big Ten championship. I think really price point is something that needs to be discussed. So right now, BetMGM, Ohio State minus 225. And so you have to ask yourself, is that what the money line would be in a potential matchup? And it's in the ballpark. It's pretty close. Projection would be about minus 210. But the Wisconsin number right now is plus 650. And that's not what the money line is going to be in a game on a neutral site with these two teams against each other. You get Wisconsin back to full speed to what they were in years past. It could be a little bit lower than that. So the target for Wisconsin should be about 5-1, considering what the money line will be in the conference championship game. So Wisconsin is a small buy at plus 650, but that number needs to be hedged once you actually get to the Big Ten championship game, which is why price point is so important here. You don't want to take Ohio State over minus 200, and you don't want to take Wisconsin anything less than 5-1.
There you have it. Good stuff. All things Big Ten, as comprehensive as you're going to find on our first official episode of Big Bets on Campus. Thank you for migrating over to our primary feed. Make sure you leave a review, subscribe if you haven't already. Tell a friend, tell an enemy. We are very important to us. We're going to grow this feed and bring you just tons of college content and only college content to your feed. So help us out with the review, and we'll do giveaways throughout the season. Thank you for listening. It's time for us to go get to work on the Pac-12, which will be out next Tuesday. Thanks again, Collin, and thanks all of you for listening. We'll catch y'all next time. Cheers.
Peace out.